664. Counsel are all present. The jury is not present. The court's been informed that there is or was a defect in State's Exhibit 95B, and counsel have, I believe, come to a stipulation as to how to handle that issue. Who's going to make that record? Go ahead, Mr. Neff.
Your Honor, as to 95B, the prior motions in limine discussed whether or not the term polygraph would come in at any time. Both parties agreed that it would not. There was a brief reference at the very end of the playing of 95B of the word polygraph. I don't believe Your Honor or one of opposing counsel heard it. I heard it, and I believe Ms. Nicole Jensen heard it. I asked Ms. Maureen Hughes to stop playing the tape at that point, and we stopped it probably maybe 5 to 8 seconds after that. I do not know, frankly, if the jury heard or did not hear it, given the background noise that is associated with these tapes. In an effort to insulate the jury from that, I believe the agreement with opposing counsel is for us to, and we've been in the process of re-editing 95B to cut it before that reference becomes apparent. And then also, and have that be State's Exhibit 95B that actually gets to be reviewed by the jury if they so wish to in chambers during their deliberations, so that this matter can be reviewed if needed on appellate review. We are also creating a separate recording that is the totality of this recording as originally created, and we will submit that as a court exhibit to be named as Your Honor sees fit.
Mr. Cook?
That's correct, Your Honor.
Court accepts the stipulation of counsel and finds it an appropriate way to deal with this issue. Off the record. Anything else we need to discuss before the jury comes back? Ms. Jill Gardner. Step forward, please. Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give is true and correct, so help you God?
I do.
Have a seat in the witness chair. If you would please sit forward and speak directly into the microphone.
Can you please state your name?
My name is Jill Gardner.
And Ms. Gardner, what do you do for a living?
I'm a preschool teacher with the Pajama School District.
And where do you work?
Pickwick Early Childhood Center.
Is that Pickwick, was it previously known as Agassiz?
Yes, ma'am.
How long have you been a teacher?
This is my 29th year.
And you said you're a preschool teacher? Is that
Yes.
Would Cloe Chandler have been a student of yours?
Yes.
Would she have gone to preschool with you during the 2017-2018 year?
I believe that was the year, yes.
Do you recall what months that would have been?
It would have been August of that year to first week in June, probably.
Do you know how many school days she would have missed that year?
I know it's very few, and when I looked back at the progress report, it was only 4 days.
In preschool, that's an afternoon program, or at least it was that.
It was at that time. She was there just for the afternoon, 2.5 hours.
So she spent 2.5 hours every day with you?
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about what Chloe was like?
I think the best way to describe her is just the little girl that skipped down the hall. She was very excited about being at school, and she loved learning new things, and she was excited just to try anything new.
So a very happy kid.
Yes.
Over that year, did Chloe make progress at school?
Yes, she did.
And you mentioned a progress log. Do you keep a progress log for your students as the year goes on?
Yes, we do.
Your Honor, may I approach?
You may.
Ms. Gardner, I'm showing you what's previously been marked as Defense Exhibit K2. Can you take a look at that for me? Is that the progress log that you were referring to?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, at this time I would move to admit what has previously been stipulated by the parties as Defense Exhibit K2.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, Defendant's Exhibit K2 is received.
Ms. Gardner, can you briefly explain for the jury how Chloe would have progressed throughout that year?
She came in, I guess, pretty typical of a lot of my students. She didn't know a lot of letter sounds, or anything like that. And we check it 3 times a year. At the end of the year, she knew all of her uppercase letters, all lowercase except Q. She knew no letter sounds. She knew like 19 letter sounds, which a lot of kids struggle with that. So I thought that was pretty amazing. She was counting up to 30. She wasn't rhyming or doing a lot of those kind of skills when she started, but she left with those skills. So she worked very hard.
So she did pretty well as the year went on.
Yes, she did.
Did you have any concerns about Chloe's well-being?
No, I did not.
Did she appear well-dressed every day?
Yes.
Did you have any concerns about whether or not she was being fed?
No.
Did she ever come to school looking like she needed a bath?
No, she didn't.
I want to talk with you a little bit about her parents' involvement. Can you tell me how many interactions you would have had with Kelsie Thomas that year?
I'm not sure the number, but I know things like she was at, they came to both parent-teacher conferences. They were at the field trip that we went to Des Moines to the Blake Park Zoo. They were there for moving up our graduation day. I know several times she would drop her off or pick her up, but more than likely she went to our RAP program, which is our before and after school program. I know on a few occasions that she would bring her to school. She would make sure to tell me whether she was to go to that program after school that day or not.
And so this RAP program, can you explain that a little bit for the jury today?
It's just basically like a daycare. It's for parents that work so that they can drop their, if they need care before and after school for their children.
So you would see Ms. Thomas if she dropped Chloe off at school, but if Chloe went to the RAP program after school?
I typically did not see her, no, yeah.
What's that? I'm sorry.
I typically didn't see her then if she went to RAP.
To RAP after school.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a yes?
Yes.
You also mentioned this field trip to Des Moines. Can you explain that a little?
We used to take a yearly field trip to Des Moines. A lot of times, and we would invite the parents to go because of the large number of kids we were taking with us to help with supervising. I know that Chloe took the bus with us that morning up, which is most of our kids do because they don't get to ride the bus, so it's pretty exciting to ride the school bus. And then a lot of the parents will take the children home with them because they'll choose to stay later at the zoo because we have to get back so early before the other kids get dismissed from school, or they'll do some shopping or something in Des Moines. And I believe that she rode the bus with us and then went home with her parents.
And how about the graduation ceremony? What would your interactions with Ms. Thomas have been like on that day?
I think they were very positive as I can remember. I remember taking pictures with Chloe and saying our goodbyes.
Thank you. And you saw Kelsey at both parent-teacher conferences,
Yes.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And were Kelsey's interactions with Chloe appropriate on those occasions as well?
And very appropriate, yes.
And why do you say that?
I like the first one. I don't remember the second one as well as the first one. The first one, since our kids got dropped off and picked up in the gym, the parents didn't bring them to the classrooms. It was exciting for their parents to be in their room. And I remember Chloe was so excited about showing them everything that she did in the room. And I remember Kelsey was very patient and kind with her. And she said, well, how about we have our conference and then we can see your room. And so we sat down and had our conference. And I remember Chloe just being excited about showing them everything in the classroom.
Did Kelsey appear to you, from what you observed, to be a responsible parent?
Yes.
And in what ways?
I know a few times when she was gone, she would call to tell me that, she had an appointment or was sick, that she wouldn't be there. I can't remember anything specific, but I don't remember Chloe not having things, so that if I sent a note home saying we needed this for class or we were going to be doing something, or whether Chloe always had what she needed.
Were there any red flags or anything that struck out as odd to you?
No.
So any concerns at all about Chloe's home life?
Pardon?
Any concerns at all about Chloe's home life?
No.
And as a teacher, you're a mandatory reporter, is that correct?
Yes.
Can you explain what it means to be a mandatory reporter?
It basically means if I suspect that there's any kind of abuse going on, that by law I'm required to report that to DHS.
Did you notice or suspect any type of abuse with Chloe?
No, I did not.
What was your reaction to hearing the news that Chloe had passed?
Objection. Relevance.
Objection overruled. Witness can answer.
I was very surprised.
Was Chloe able to tie her shoes?
Yes.
Did you have many 4-year-olds who were able to tie their shoes?
I think to this day she might be the only one.
Did her shoes stay tied when she tied them?
I think so because I don't remember tying them after that.
Would other kids come to her to have their shoes tied as well?
Yeah, because I used to joke with her. I said, now that you've won, you can tie all the shoes in the room.
Thank you. I have nothing further, Your Honor.
Cross.
I have no questions, Your Honor.
You may step down. May this witness be excused.
Yes, Your Honor.
You may also be excused and leave the courtroom if you choose to do so. Defense may call next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. Defense calls Dr. Thomas Young.
Step forward, please. Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give is true and correct, so help you God?
Yes.
Have a seat in the witness chair. Go ahead, Mr. Cook.
Thank you, Your Honor. Please state your name.
My name is Thomas, Thomas Young, Young.
And sir, what is your profession?
I am a forensic pathologist.
Do you hold any board certifications?
Yes,
And what certifications do you hold?
I am certified by the American Board of Pathology in anatomic, clinical, and forensic pathology.
Where are you currently employed?
I am self-employed. I work out of my home in Kansas City, Missouri.
And what is the name of your company?
Heartland Forensic Pathology, LLC.
And how long have you been running Heartland Forensic Pathology, LLC?
Full-time since January of 2007.
What kind of services do you provide at Heartland Forensic Pathology, LLC?
If there are people who need the services of a forensic pathologist, I offer my services.
Are there any other professional roles you are currently engaged in?
My practice is basically 100% forensic pathology. Much of what I do out of my own home office is consultation. I do, however, perform medical examiner services on a temporary basis in some places.
Okay. Are you also currently a lab director anywhere?
Yes,
And where is that at?
I am the clinical laboratory director for the Putnam County Hospital in Unionville, Missouri.
Okay, and you just mentioned some part-time contract work that you do as a forensic pathologist, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Can you describe that to the jury, please?
Right now I have an arrangement with the Centers for Disease Control to provide medical examiner services for West Virginia. So I travel out there about every 2 weeks and perform autopsy. Currently our country is undergoing a big opioid epidemic, and West Virginia is perhaps the worst in the country. So they are overwhelmed with cases in which there are drug deaths, but they don't have enough personnel to be able to perform the autopsies.
Okay. And so this part-time forensic pathologist work that you're doing, is that any different than a medical examiner's work?
No, it's the same.
Okay. Dr. Young, do you have a current resume or CV?
Yes.
May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
Dr. Young, I'm going to hand you what I previously marked as Defense Exhibit I-2. Do you recognize what that document is?
I do.
And what is it?
It is a copy of my curriculum vitae.
Generally speaking, does that document list your academic and professional accomplishments throughout your career?
Yes, sir.
And is the information contained in your CV accurate?
It is.
Your Honor, at this time I would move to admit Dr. Young's CV Defense Exhibit I-2.
Any objection? Defendant's Exhibit I-2 is received.
Dr. Young, I want to talk to you a little bit about your credentials. Can you tell the jury about your experience and how you became a forensic pathologist beginning from medical school?
I attended and graduated from medical school at Loma Linda University School of Medicine in Loma Linda, California. This is Southern California. I attended school there for 3.5 years, from 1977 to 1980. Following medical school, I performed a residency and internship in anatomic and clinical pathology at the Medical Center at Loma Linda University. Following that, I spent 3.5 years of active duty service in the United States Air Force as a hospital pathologist. And then following that, I did a fellowship in forensic pathology in Atlanta, Georgia. This was from 1988 to 1989.
And as I look at your CV, Dr. Young, it appears that you've worn a few different professional hats at the same time at different points in your career. Is that true?
Sure.
For instance, while you were the medical examiner for the Georgia Bureau of Investigation from 89 to 95, you were also simultaneously serving as associate medical examiner for Fulton County in Atlanta. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And while you were doing that from 91 through 95, you were also teaching pathology to medical students at Emory University School of Medicine. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Likewise, after you moved to Missouri, you were the chief medical examiner for Jackson County in Kansas City, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you were also simultaneously serving as Platte County, Clay County, and Cass County at various times while you were also serving as the Jackson County medical examiner, correct?
Yes, sir.
Dr. Young, is it correct to say that you've been engaged in forensic pathology full-time since 1988?
Yes, sir.
Has there ever been a time in your career since 1988 in which you faced disciplinary measures, a censure, whether founded or unfounded, anything like that?
No, sir.
Based on your CV, would it be correct that from the beginning of your career in 1988 until approximately 2006, you worked as a forensic pathologist for one government entity or another, whether that be federal, military, or state, conducting autopsies, doing similar work to a state medical examiner?
Yes, sir.
And all of that would be in addition to your experience teaching medical students both in Georgia and in Missouri while you were acting as a pathologist, correct?
Correct.
Dr. Young, have you authored any books or articles in the area of forensic pathology?
I have.
And to give the jury some context as to how your experience can help them understand the medical dynamics in this case, Dr. Young, I'm going to confirm with you some of your publications that appear in your CV. Is that all right?
Certainly.
In 2000, you co-authored a letter entitled Restraint Asphyxia that was published in the American Journal of Forensic and Medical Pathology. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
In 2008, you wrote an article entitled Forensic Science and the Scientific Method. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
In 2009, you wrote an article entitled The Inferential Test for Expert Testimony, correct?
Yes, sir.
In 2010, you authored a letter entitled Do Resuscitation-Related Injuries Kill Infants and Children, correct?
Correct.
In 2011, you wrote an article entitled Putting It All Together, The Logic Behind the Forensic Scientific Method and the Inferential Test. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, doctor, as the jury just heard, you've written several articles in this field and specifically on the topic of the inferential test. Can you tell the jury what the inferential test is and how it relates to forensic pathology?
Sure. The inferential test is basically a test to make sure that one is inferring properly from evidence. Inferring meaning drawing conclusions from. The inferential test is as follows. One can be reasonably certain if witness accounts of the past are consistent or not consistent with physical evidence in the present, but one cannot reliably surmise past events from physical evidence unless there's only one plausible explanation for that evidence.
Your Honor, at this time, I would ask the court to recognize Dr. Thomas Young as an expert in the field of forensic pathology.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Dr. Young will be recognized by the court as an expert in the field of forensic pathology.
Dr. Young, can you tell the jury when it was that the defense team for Kelsie Thomas reached out to you in this case?
December 5, 2019.
And what services were you asked to perform?
I was asked to review the records and offer opinions.
What is your hourly rate?
$450 per hour.
Are you billing at your standard rate in this case?
Yes, sir.
In the course of your consultation work as a forensic pathologist, have you ever been approached by a defense attorney like myself and asked to perform a case review, but ultimately your findings were not what the defense attorney was hoping for?
Correct. That has happened.
Would it be fair to say that just because we're paying for your services does not mean we're paying for your opinion?
That would be fair.
As part of your analysis, Dr. Young, can you outline for the jury all the materials that you would have reviewed in coming to your opinion? And you may refer to any notes you might have if you have those.
Yes, sir. I looked at documents from the Iowa Office of the State Medical Examiner, including the autopsy report of Cloe Chandler. I looked at the neuropathology report, or the brain examination report from the University of Iowa Diagnostic Laboratories, the heart examination report from the Jesse Edwards Registry of Cardiovascular Disease, the deposition transcript of Dr. Michelle Cavalier, reports from the Division of Criminal Investigation, the pre-hospital care report, the Iowa incident report, records from All Ages Pediatrics PC, reports from the Ottumwa Police Department, and photographs from the autopsy.
Thank you, Doctor. After concluding your review, what did you do?
I did what I usually do, and that is apply the inferential process that I use as a forensic pathologist, and from them offer my opinions.
Okay. Based on your review, were you able to come to an opinion on the cause of death of Cloe Chandler to a reasonable degree of medical certainty?
Yes.
And just generally speaking, Doctor, what is your opinion, and we'll get into the specifics as you go along.
Okay, my opinion has to do with what was witnessed, not only by the mother of the child, but also by others who participated in the attempt to resuscitate the child. Looking at those statements and looking at the findings from the autopsy and other physical evidence related to the case, it's my opinion that the witness accounts, particularly the initial ones, are consistent with the autopsy findings and that there are no inconsistencies. As such, were I to offer an opinion as to cause of death, the cause of death would be hanging.
Dr. Young, since the time of your deposition on February the 13th of 2020, have you done anything additionally related to this case?
Yes.
And what is that?
If I might refer to my notes.
Sure.
Your Honor, may we briefly approach? State has not been provided with anything since deposition.
You can briefly approach.
Briefly there, I had asked you if there was anything additionally you had done since the time of your deposition in this case.
And I answered yes.
And what was that?
I reviewed transcript of testimony given by Michelle Cavalier.
Okay. And we're not going to get into the details of that, but you did review that testimony, correct?
Yes, sir.
Did reviewing that additional testimony, let me strike that. Did Dr. Cavalier's additional testimony convince you in any way that your initial opinion was incorrect?
No, sir.
Are there any other additional materials that you were not able to review in this case that would cause you to change your opinion?
Okay, I was made aware of sections 10 and 13 of the Division of Criminal Investigation file. I think that there were items having to do with digital media and trying to remember what number 13 was.
Cell phone extraction?
That may be it. Regardless, those items would not be relevant to my analysis.
Okay. Dr. Young, based on your review, is there anything about the fact that Dr. Cavalier personally conducted the autopsy of Cloe Chandler that would render her opinion more accurate than yours?
Objection, Your Honor. Prior motion to eliminate section 9.
Sustained.
So the jury is clear about this, Dr. Young. What parts of Dr. Cavalier's examination are you in disagreement with? Are you in disagreement with her findings or her opinion, or both her findings and opinion?
Okay, if I understand you correctly, findings basically means what she actually saw at the autopsy. Is that correct?
Correct, Your Honor. Correct, sir.
I have no dispute with what Dr. Cavalier saw at the autopsy.
And one of the documents you reviewed was Dr. Cavalier's autopsy report, correct?
Yes, sir.
Do you have any reason to disagree with Dr. Cavalier's observations and measurements, things of that nature that she made in her autopsy report?
No, sir.
So would it be accurate to say that in coming to your own opinion, you were relying on Dr. Cavalier's own observations and measurements in informing that opinion? Is that correct?
Correct.
As part of your review of the history of this case, Dr. Young, were you aware that Kelsie Thomas initially reported having found Cloe Chandler hanging in a closet?
Yes, sir.
Further, that Kelsie Thomas reported she took Cloe down from the closet and contacted emergency responders who attempted some life-saving measures?
Yes, sir. I'm aware of that.
And I believe you testified earlier that the statements that Kelsie Thomas provided initially, as well as other witnesses, including first responders, all of that was consistent with Dr. Cavalier's autopsy findings, the measurements and things that she observed, correct?
Correct.
As part of your review of the history of this case, Dr. Young, were you aware that Kelsie Thomas ultimately confessed to strangling her daughter, Cloe Chandler?
Yes, sir.
And again, generally speaking, and we'll get into the details here shortly, did you find that Kelsie Thomas's ultimate confession was consistent with Dr. Cavalier's medical findings at autopsy?
No, sir.
Can you tell the jury, again, generally how your opinion deviates from Dr. Cavalier's opinion?
Once again, I don't have any dispute with what Dr. Cavalier saw at her autopsy. That's fine. The big difference here would basically be describing the conclusions that are drawn from what was seen at the autopsy. Dr. Cavalier looked at the autopsy report and imagined a strangulation. I looked at the autopsy report and I just simply looked at what was said by Ms. Thomas initially and by the people who were basically taking care of the child. and I found it to be consistent with what they said, a hanging. The major difference here between Dr. Cavalier and myself is that she's imagining a strangulation. I'm not imagining anything. I'm just simply taking what was seen and heard by eyewitnesses and pointing out that what was seen and heard by eyewitnesses is consistent with the autopsy findings.
In your opinion, Dr. Young, would Dr. Cavalier have any basis in the medical literature or an experience to say that in this case it would be more probable that Cloe Chandler died as a result of strangulation as opposed to a hanging? Is that something that you believe she could say?
No.
Why not?
She has no way of measuring the probability that her imagining the strangulation would be correct. Her statement of probability is what you would call a subjective feeling. It would be maybe something that she would vote on if she were in Las Vegas and she were trying to figure out which team was going to win the Super Bowl. Something that she might feel in her gut, perhaps. But in terms of anything objective and scientific that she can use to measure it, there isn't any such thing. Her statement of probability is simply her intuition.
Does using items of probability work in real-life cases in pathology?
In a limited sense. If you know how many items there are, and you can basically measure it. For instance, if you flip a coin, whether you get heads or tails, it's going to be a 0.5 probability. That's measurable because you know what the information is. In something like this, where things are a lot more complex, you've got past events that are extremely numerous that go beyond simply beyond flipping a coin. So being able to measure probability is not anything that would be scientifically done or mathematically done.
In forming her opinion, Doctor, are you aware of any medical or knowledge basis that Dr. Cavalier could reasonably do what she's claiming to do here?
No.
As you reviewed this case, Doctor, were there any assumptions that you felt that Dr. Cavalier had made in this case that impacted her ultimate opinion?
She makes numerous assumptions. Assumption basically meaning a hypothesis or a guess that is taken for granted. That's what an assumption is. Her opinion here is very, very complex and it's full of assumptions.
Speaking specifically to some of Dr. Cavalier's testimony, Doctor, I believe the jury would have heard Dr. Cavalier claim that that there is more injury existing in this case than she would have expected to see in a hanging, as she would expect a child to lose consciousness quickly, and therefore that would have limited any thrashing about or any resistance the child would have because she's unconscious. Can you address that assertion?
This is all speculation. She doesn't really have any basis of any factual matter or any scientific literature or anything like that to be able to conclude that way. She's just basically using her intuition, her gut. Whether or not there might be more hemorrhage or less hemorrhage or whatever, in these cases, in fact, they're highly variable. And there may be circumstances and situations that can explain all kinds of things in all kinds of ways. She's making numerous assumptions.
Are you familiar with the term static hanging?
Static basically means that there's no motion. So I am assuming, maybe I shouldn't do that, but perhaps it means just simply a person who is hanging but is not being moved.
Based on your review, do you feel that Dr. Cavalier made an assumption that this was a quote-unquote static hanging?
I don't know.
Is, in your opinion, Dr. Cavalier failing to take into account I guess let me strike that. In your opinion, Doctor, is Dr. Cavalier's assumption that the child lost consciousness quickly and therefore wouldn't have been thrashing around, is that a appropriate assumption to make in this case?
No, it's not an appropriate assumption.
And why not?
They have had videotaped evidence from people who have hanged themselves. And frequently, during the process of the hanging, there is some jerking and moving around.
Now, Dr. Cavalier, in her testimony, I'm sure the jury was paying attention, indicated that there may be movement, but not movement sufficient to actually move the ligature around the person's neck to create the abrasions that would be consistent with what she saw in Cloe Chandler's case. Do you agree or disagree with that assessment?
That is highly speculative. She doesn't really have any basis in any kind of scientific knowledge or fact to be able to draw that kind of conclusion. She's guessing.
Dr. Young, we're talking about the topic of Cloe Chandler's weight and the injuries that Dr. Cavalier had observed. And I believe Dr. Cavalier's opinion in that regard that she was surprised to find any injuries given the light weight of the child and that this was a hanging death. Are you aware of any relevant literature that would support Dr. Cavalier's opinion in that regard?
No, sir.
Dr. Cavalier also testified that, again, because the child was light and because the material was soft, that she was surprised to find any injury at all. Do you agree or disagree with that conclusion?
Well, 47 pounds is not light. Okay, for instance, if you were to go to a health club and pick up a barbell and stick it on a bar before doing a bench press, picking up that 45-pound weight would not be light. Also, if you were basically returning from an air flight and you were there to basically get your checked luggage and you had a piece of luggage that weighed 45 pounds, you would not consider it light because that's nearly to the limit that you would be allowed to take it on the airplane. And that takes quite a bit of effort and strength to be able to move that kind of nearly 50-pound weight. So her idea of being surprised that 47 pounds would not leave any kind of a mark stretches credulity. It's not believable.
How about Dr. Cavalier's assertion that the ligature itself was very soft and broad, and again, she was surprised that it would have left any marks?
My understanding is that the ligature basically are pajama bottoms. And basically, if you were to take that kind of a garment, which is not padded, and be able to stretch it out, you could basically have folds and whatever that could form a ligature mark that's from 3/4 of an inch to 1 inch wide, as what Dr. Cavalier described at the autopsy. So that particular 3/4 to 1 inch wide mark across the neck would be consistent with pajama bottom.
And just prior to your testimony, I actually had you physically observe those pajama bottoms, correct?
Yes, sir.
Is there anything, as you observe those pajama bottoms, that would be inconsistent in your view, or anything about those pajama bottoms that would lead you to believe that they could not have caused the ligature marks that you observed on Cloe Chandler's neck?
Looking at the pajama bottoms, there isn't anything that would preclude it from causing a 3/4 to 1 inch wide undulating mark across the neck, such as what was described in the autopsy report, and also featured in photographs.
Okay. And again, you reviewed all the autopsy photographs as part of your review, correct?
Yes, sir.
During Dr. Cavender's testimony, she indicated that, again, due to these dynamics, she was surprised to find evidence of injury beneath the skin of Cloe Chandler's neck. Do you agree or disagree with that assessment?
I don't know why she's surprised. Finding hemorrhage in the neck and in the soft tissues is a frequent finding at autopsy. It can be found even in situations where there's a natural death and the head and neck are basically have engorged blood vessels. Basically having a child that's found hanging and then manipulated in a resuscitative effort, having a finding of these kinds of hemorrhages that she's described would not be unexpected. However, what is interesting here is that the kinds of hemorrhages that are usually noted in strangulation cases are absent in this case.
Now, and we're going to address that again here in a second here, Doctor. As forensic pathologists like you and Dr. Cavalier, do you have reference material that you look to for classic signs of asphyxia and strangulation for purposes of helping you analyze any specific case?
Well, sure. There are items that are basically in forensic pathology textbooks and literature that address these issues, that address issues such as what is commonly seen in a strangulation.
And based on your knowledge of those materials, is Dr. Cavalier's opinion that this was a strangulation supported by those same materials?
No.
Why not?
Often with a case, what is described as strangulation is it's a very, very violent kind of death. If somebody is using a ligature, basically either a cord or some other object, to basically stretch around your neck and block the airway or the blood vessels, that sets up a situation that is very, very violent. If anyone were to do that to any of us, we would struggle with all our might to be able to relieve that kind of pressure around our neck. One of the ways that people usually do that who are being strangled is to grab the ligature and try to pull it off. And frequently with those kinds of findings, there are usually fingernail scratches around the neck in association with whatever mark might have been made. Or if there was just basically, it was a manual strangulation, there would frequently be scratches around the neck, not from the person doing the strangling, but the person who is trying to relieve the strangulation. There are no such marks like these around Chloe's neck. It's just basically this mark without any of the scratches. Furthermore, what frequently happens is that strangulation cases are often associated with head injury, because usually when there's a strangulation going on, there may be some trauma from blunt force trauma to the head that goes on. There's no evidence of that at all in Chloe. Furthermore, there may be pinpoint hemorrhages called petechial hemorrhages that are frequently seen in the filmy coverings of the eyes, which are called the conjunctiva, or there may be petechiae on the face. She doesn't have any petechiae in those areas. The petechiae are basically in the pleural lining, which is basically the space around the lungs or in the larynx. Petechiae in those things are non-specific. They can be seen in a wide variety of deaths. They're not specific at all for strangulation. So those kinds of findings, the scratches around the neck, the evidence of head trauma, the petechial hemorrhages in the face and in the eyes, these are, and also internally, there may be some broken bones in the neck. There's the highway bone, which is a C-shaped bone that sits in the neck, that may be broken, and the areas where hemorrhage are specifically noted associated with strangulation is whether or not there's hemorrhage around the area where the bone is broken or the cartilage is broken, indicating that the break there was while the person was still having blood pressure and still living. She doesn't have any broken bones in the neck. She doesn't have any broken cartilages in the neck. In fact, usually with a hanging death, there typically are no broken bones or cartilages in the neck because usually a person is quite gentle on their neck when they're hanging themselves. In this sort of a situation, there are no broken bones in the neck. There are no fractures. These are basically described in the literature for strangulation. There are none of these findings here in this particular case.
Now, Dr. Young, I'm sure that the jury had made note as you commented about the lack of scratch marks on Chloe's neck, because that was something that Dr. Cavalier testified to in her testimony. Is it true that at one point during your consultation with the defense team, I had you take a look at some photographs specifically?
Yes, sir.
And do you recall what was depicted in the particular photographs that I asked you to review?
Well, there are these areas of pallor, of paleness that can be seen, that I believe they were thinking that those could be fingers.
Okay, and what is your opinion of that?
I really don't know. The problem with something like that is it could be all kinds of things. It's not anything that you could say, oh, this is definitely a mark of a finger. Furthermore, having an area where it's just simply pale is not an injury. It's not like a scratch or a scrape or anything where there's a damage of the skin. It just basically means that the blood vessels under the skin in that area don't have a lot of blood in them. It's just pale. So it's not really an injury. So taking something like that and reading or imagining things into it, I think is problematic.
Okay. Just to make sure that we're covering our bases, Doctor, and I understand if sometimes your answer may be a little repetitive. Earlier in this trial, Dr. Cavalier testified regarding the hemorrhages she found in Chloe's neck, and that they were prominent enough to where she felt that these were more consistent with a strangulation as opposed to a hanging. Again, her opinion that she didn't expect to see any injury, and not only did she see soft tissue injury, but deeper tissue injury, caused her to believe it was more probable to be a strangulation. Can you comment on that?
There have been situations where I have autopsied a wide variety of deaths in a wide variety of situations. Some of them have been natural deaths. Some of them may have been violent deaths for other reasons other than strangulation. Having hemorrhages in multiple layers in the neck and even on the back side of the neck, which she is describing, is a frequent finding. It's not really specific for anything. I could cite you many different sorts of mechanisms, everything from having blood flow restored in an area where there are leaky blood vessels, or even gravity. If, for instance, if the body is found with the head down, there may even be quite a few hemorrhages in the neck. Or there may be hemorrhages in the neck and you really don't know why they're there. But it's hardly anything that you would say, wow, this is shocking or surprising. It must mean it's a strangulation rather than a hanging. That kind of thought process is foreign to me. Okay? I don't look at that kind of a finding, particularly in an instance here where she was basically found hanging. She's relieved from hanging and they're doing a full-blown resuscitative effort on her. Finding hemorrhages in that kind of a situation in the neck which is one area that might be vigorously manipulated during a resuscitation, shouldn't really be all that surprising or shocking.
Dr. Young, you and I have discussed at one point during the resuscitation effort, I believe Corey Binge indicated that the life-saving measures appeared to cause her to go from blue to pink, or her coloring to go from blue to pink. Do you know what I'm referring to?
Yes. He makes two different statements. One of them is under testimony, where he offers testimony. He says there were no signs of life at all. However, in the ambulance report, the documentation there, which is basically made at the time everything is happening, he says that during the resuscitation, the chest compressions and the rescue breathing, that she actually turned from blue to pink. That indicates, often a change of color like that would indicate that there's still some ongoing circulation of blood. And that if you're basically providing oxygen, that circulating blood is changing from a bluish hue, which is what oxygen poor blood has, to more of a pinkish hue, which is what oxygen rich blood has. So there are some inconsistent comments. His testimony is inconsistent from what was written in his notes in the ambulance report. But it brings up the fact that you wonder if at some point during that resuscitated, that if she didn't even have some form of circulation going on, where her heart is pumping and blood is flowing.
And is it possible during those resuscitation efforts that those efforts would cause further evidence of hemorrhage?
It is possible.
And again, as far as Dr. Cavalier's testimony that it would be more probable or less probable to be a strangulation as opposed to a hanging, you're not aware of any basis for that opinion, correct?
Correct.
Now, Dr. Young, based on your experience and knowledge of the literature, do you have an opinion on Dr. Cavalier's autopsy opinion?
Objection, Your Honor. Fire State's motion in limine, Section 9.
Sustain.
Dr. Young, we've touched upon this, but in the literature that you're familiar with, does Dr. Cavalier's opinion fit any of the classic descriptors of strangulation?
No, sir.
Based on your many years conducting autopsies, consulting in autopsy cases, and teaching pathology to med students, are you aware of any one piece of professional literature that would support Dr. Cavalier's opinion that this was strangulation?
No, sir.
Are child strangulation cases rare?
Exceedingly rare. I've never seen a case of one.
And why are they rare?
In a situation where you have a small child, particularly even a real small child, the head is larger in proportion to the neck, and so it would be a lot easier, a lot more ergonomic, to just basically to be able to smother the child than it would be to strangle him. Because the nose and the mouth are particularly accessible. That would be what would be reasonable as an explanation. Suffice it to say is that strangulation deaths in infants and small children are as rare as hen's teeth.
Because they are rare, is there any child strangulation database of information for forensic pathologists like you or Dr. Cavalier to reference that you're aware of?
No, sir.
So earlier in her testimony, Dr. Cavalier attempted to draw distinctions from a medical standpoint between how a child hanging victim would present as opposed to an adult hanging victim would present? Are you aware of any textbooks or literature that would inform her on her opinion?
No, sir.
And again, Dr. Young, to make sure I'm covering all of my bases here, if Dr. Cavalier testified that for hanging deaths, the literature and her experience would show that hemorrhage is not as common or as plentiful in the neck, would you agree or disagree with that opinion?
Not as common or as plentiful in the neck as compared to what?
That, I'm sorry, Doctor, that hemorrhage in children would not be as common or as plentiful in the neck as compared to adults.
I know of no such literature on that that says anything like that.
And again, so the jury's clear, what is your opinion on all of the hemorrhages that Dr. Cavalier observed in Cloe Chandler's neck?
The hemorrhages in the neck are not specific for anything. They can be seen in a wide variety of situations. Beyond that, I can't really say. I don't want to speculate.
The types of injuries that you observed, let me strike that. The types of hemorrhages that you observed in Cloe Chandler's neck would also be consistent with some natural deaths, is that true?
Yes.
What do the petechiae and lack of petechiae found in this case demonstrate to you?
Petechiae, which are basically tiny or pinpoint hemorrhages, if they're in the voice box or on the lining around the lungs, they can be seen in a wide variety of cases. They're non-specific. They can be seen in natural deaths as well as violent deaths. Petechiae in the face and in the eyes are also technically non-specific because they can actually be seen in natural deaths too. But one of the findings that is a frequent finding with the ligature or manual strangulation, where somebody is throttling somebody around the neck, is having those kinds of hemorrhages are common. They're commonly seen. And in this case, they weren't seen at all.
In Dr. Cavalier's findings, she indicated a canting of the abrasion that goes upward and behind the ears for the furrow. Is that typical of a strangulation?
That's typical of a hanging. Okay, usually in a situation where somebody is suspended, the ligature is going to go up behind the ears and it's going to join in the back, frequently at a higher level than it is on the front. So having the abrasion canting upward like that is typical of hanging. It's not typical of a strangulation.
The autopsy report that indicated that Cloe Chandler suffered from von Willebrand's disease, is that correct?
It's called von Willebrand's disease.
Right. Is that correct?
That's how you pronounce it, yes.
Okay. And I apologize, doctor. Did the autopsy report actually indicate that Chloe had that particular disease?
That's not something that you would find at autopsy. Actually, to find von Willebrand's disease requires a lot of sophisticated clinical testing while a person is living.
Sure. And I apologize, doctor. I believe I'm misspeaking, but were you aware that Chloe Chandler had this particular disease? Was it
Yes.
intended?
Yes.
And could the fact that Chloe had that particular disease would that impact the appearance of hemorrhages at all?
Well, if she has a blood clotting problem, that might make more hemorrhage. On the other hand, even people without blood clotting problems can have hemorrhages in the neck, such as what was described in this autopsy report.
So even without the disease, it would be common to find the types of hemorrhages that you saw and observed in Cloe Chandler, and again, I believe even in natural deaths.
That's fair, yes.
Dr. Young, in testimony, Dr. Cavalier stated that she would not have expected such a complicated and prominent ligature furrow in a hanging. Do you agree with that opinion in that regard?
Frequently with a hanging there is a prominent ligature furrow. So I would disagree with that.
And how about it being complicated in that I believe her testimony was that it indicated that the furrow would have been moving around on the person's neck prior to death?
Frequently there will be abrasion and furrows in the neck even if the ligature is not moving around in the neck. Whether or not it's moving doesn't really have anything to do with it. The ligature could have basically been in place and you can still get that kind of abraded furrow. Even in that situation, that's commonly seen in hanging deaths.
Does it mean anything to you, doctor, that the furrow marks are prominent on both sides of the neck?
That's consistent with a hanging, not with a strangulation.
And we've been through this a couple of times, but just to be specific, Dr. Cavalier testified in hangings, and particularly in child hangings, the most common injury is no injury at all. Most often you would see no hemorrhage at all. Do you agree with her opinion in that regard?
The situation with a child strangulation, like I said, that's as rare as hen's teeth. But even childhood hangings are rare. Now, I have autopsied some cases where a child has hanged themselves, but this is a rare event. So in terms of being able to make those kinds of statements as if she's looked at numerous hanging deaths, I'm a little bit wary of that.
Apparently that would not be an opinion you would render?
No, sir.
In testimony, Dr. Cavalier also had discussed how at one point during Kelsie Thomas's final confession, she indicated that Chloe was staring at her, and that somehow this indicated that Chloe was at the end of her life and exhibiting signs of being at the end of her life. Can you comment on that at all?
That sounds very imaginative. It even sounds very dramatic. But as far as it being scientific, it doesn't pass that kind of muster.
Why not?
I'm not aware of dead people staring or nearly dead people staring. That's just kind of weird.
One moment, Your Honor. And Dr. Young, you also received and reviewed some crime scene photos for your case review, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
May I approach, Your Honor?
You may. All right, Dr. Young, I'm going to hand you what's already been previously marked and admitted as defense exhibits A through Z and then A2 through G2. Can you tell the jury, are those just some of the photographs that you looked at as part of your case review?
They are.
Okay. And if I could see those, I want to draw your attention, Dr. Young, to these last two photographs that I pulled out. These will be defense exhibits K and L. If you would take a look at those, please.
Yes, sir.
Do you recognize what's depicted in defense exhibits K and L?
Yes, sir.
And what do you see depicted in those photographs?
The pajama bottoms with pajama pants, and they're lying on a bed in a comforter.
And in defense exhibit K, do those pants appear to be stretched out in some way?
Yes.
Did you take those photographs into account in your analysis in this case?
Yes.
Do you believe that those pajama pants are consistent with the case history that was provided initially by Kelsie Thomas regarding the version of the events that transpired?
Yes.
Is there anything inconsistent that you would note in your examination of the marks on Cloe Chandler's neck, in your observations of the pajama pants? Are there any inconsistencies that you noted?
No, sir.
And Dr. Young, we indicated we would be more specific about this, and now more specifically, if you were the medical examiner in this case, what would your opinion be?
If I were to assign cause and manner of death, you mean? On a death
If you
certificate?
were to assign cause of death.
Cause of death would be hanging.
And what evidence supports your conclusion?
In a situation where a witness provides an account, which is very, very detailed, and the account is consistent with the findings, there's no reason not to believe the account. And as such, I would accept it and call this a hanging.
As a forensic pathologist, in determining manner of death, what information were you taking into account? I'm sorry, cause of death.
Cause of death, basically I'm comparing what was seen by eyewitnesses to what was found at the autopsy and other physical evidence.
Are you taking all the information into account or just some of the information?
All of it.
And as I believe you testified earlier, you're also taking into account the fact that Kelsie Thomas later confessed to this crime, allegedly, correct?
Yes.
And doctor, are you rendering your opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to the manner of death of Cloe Chandler?
I mean, cause of death.
I'm sorry, cause of death.
Yes, sir.
And again, that is?
Hanging.
And before I conclude my questioning, Dr. Young, could you just again briefly summarize for the jury the fundamental problems you see and how Dr. Chandler reached her opinion?
Sure. I mentioned the inferential test, which goes, one can be reasonably certain if witness accounts of the past are consistent or not consistent with physical evidence in the present, which is, I've just described here, is what I did. I compared the witness accounts of the past to the physical evidence of the present. I'm telling you that they are all consistent, no inconsistencies. And then the rest of the inferential test goes, but one cannot reliably surmise past events from physical evidence. In other words, you can't take an autopsy and imagine or surmise the past events, because there may be many different kinds of stories, many different kinds of scenarios that can lead to the same autopsy findings. It's not reliable to do that. That's why you need to listen carefully to the people who were there at the time and see what they say and see whether or not it fits. And if what they say doesn't fit or if there's some other problem, it's possible here in a circumstantial evidence type of situation to say, well, there's only one plausible explanation, only one thing that it can be. But that doesn't apply in this case, because in this case, the account that was given here by the eyewitnesses is consistent with what was found at the autopsy, so there's no reason not to believe that account. And as such, that would be how I would infer. On the other hand, Dr. Chandler has basically eliminated those accounts, at least that first account, and basically imagined a strangulation scenario, something that nobody saw. Nobody's described as seeing it, at least in that first interview, that first statement that was given initially. And as such, that's not a reliable way to come to a conclusion. Imagining or surmising or guessing the past events from looking at an autopsy is not a good approach. That's what Dr. Chandler did. It's not reliable.
And in addition, part of why it's not reliable are the assumptions that you've outlined for the jury that Dr. Chandler made in coming to her opinion. Is that correct?
Yes. An assumption basically is a hypothesis or a guess that is assumed as true. It's taken for granted. Okay, you can't take for granted something that has not been tested reliably. A strangulation scenario, there's nobody that saw a strangulation take place. And as such, it's not reliable. It's not tested reliably. It's just simply her guess. And it's a very complicated guess. A strangulation basically means that it's not simply one event. It means that somebody intended to harm the child and went about all the things that you do to strangle a child, of which there really isn't any evidence for it. Okay? This is why it's not reliable to do what Dr. Chandler has done. It's important to listen to people who are actually there to see what they saw and compare what they saw with the outcome.
Thank you, Dr. I have no further questions.
Members of the jury will take a morning break. Please remember all the prior admonitions. Keep an open mind. Don't close your mind. Don't talk to anyone about this case. Pay no attention to media accounts. Don't do any investigation on your own. We'll be on break until it says 9:30, but actually it's 10:30 when you will be back in your seats.